Story 1. The Passenger in the Rain. The rain came down in relentless sheets, drumming against the windshield of my beat-up Chevy as I navigated the winding back roads home from my midnight shift at Rosie's Diner. The neon sign of the diner had long faded into the rear view, swallowed by the inky blackness of the night. It was one of those quiet shifts, the kind where the clock seems to mock you with every sluggish tick, and the only customers are truckers nursing black coffee and regrets. By the time I locked up, I was wired. Too much caffeine, too little sleep. I knew I'd need a melatonin to coax my restless mind into slumber when I got home. The road I took was a familiar one, a scenic stretch by day, lined with rolling hills and quaint family-owned shops that dotted the landscape like forgotten relics. But at night, it transformed into something else entirely. A desolate ribbon of asphalt cutting through endless forests, with only the occasional flicker of a lone street lamp to break the darkness. The rain made it worse, blurring the world beyond my headlights into a smeared watercolor of shadows and uncertainty. I was passing one of those little parking lots, a cluster of shuttered stores and a well-loved deli, when my headlights caught something under a flickering street lamp. A figure stood there drenched and solitary, arm outstretched in a desperate wave. I slowed, my tires hissing against the wet pavement, and squinted through the downpour. It was a woman, tall and gaunt, her silhouette sharp against the halo of light. She looked older, maybe mid-50s, her thin frame swallowed by a sodden coat. Her face, illuminated briefly as I rolled closer, was weathered but kind, though her smile revealed a few missing teeth that sent a shiver of unease through me. I lowered my window, rain spitting against my cheek. "You need a ride," I called, my voice barely carrying over the storm. She hurried over, her movements jerky, like a marionette on frayed strings. "Oh, you're a lifesaver," she exclaimed, yanking open the passenger door and sliding in, bringing with her the scent of wet wool and something faintly metallic. "I'm just heading up to town, not far." Her gratitude was effusive, almost theatrical, as she settled into the seat, water pooling around her on the worn upholstery. I glanced at her, trying to gauge her story. She didn't smell homeless, but the rain could have masked that. Her hair, plastered to her skull, was impossible to judge. Maybe it was neat once, or maybe it was always a tangled mess. Still, she seemed harmless, her chatter light and appreciative as I pulled back onto the road. "I'm a good person," I told myself, gripping the wheel a little tighter. "I can't leave a woman out in this mess. A man, though? That'd be a hard pass. Call it instinct, call it the world we live in, but I wasn't taking chances." We drove in relative silence for a while, the radio crackling faintly with some old country tune. She hummed along, off-key, her bony fingers tapping against her knee. I stole glances at her, noting the way her eyes darted to the side mirrors, like she was expecting something or someone to appear. "You from around here?" I asked, trying to fill the void. "Oh, here and there," she said vaguely, her smile widening. "Just passing through, you know." Her evasiveness prickled at me, but I let it slide. We were nearing an intersection, a gas station glowing like a beacon on the corner. My tank was low, and I figured I might as well fill up while I was here. "I'm gonna stop for gas," I told her. "You want anything from inside? Coffee? Snacks?" She shook her head, her eyes glinting in the dashboard light. "No thanks, honey. You're too kind." I parked by a pump and dashed through the rain to the station, paying the sleepy attendant for gas and grabbing a six-pack of spiked seltzers for the weekend. When I returned, my heart lurched. The passenger seat was empty. The woman was gone. I scanned the lot, the rain stinging my eyes, but the place was deserted. No sign of her, not even a footprint in the mud. A pang of guilt hit me. Had she been more desperate than I realized? But there was also a flicker of relief, like I'd dodged something I couldn't quite name. I filled the tank, the pump's rhythmic click, the only sound besides the storm, and drove home, my mind churning. My apartment was on the first floor of a two-family house, the kind with a shared foyer and a landlord too cheap to fix the lock on the outer door. I let myself in, shaking off the rain, and set the seltzers on the counter. The melatonin didn't work its usual magic that night. I tossed and turned, my thoughts snagged on the woman, her missing teeth, her nervous energy, the way she'd vanished without a trace. Sometime in the early hours, I woke with a start, my bedroom shrouded in darkness. My mouth was dry, my head foggy from the melatonin's lingering grip. I reached for the water bottle on my nightstand, but a sound, a soft shuffle, froze me in place. My eyes darted to the corner of the room, where the shadows seemed to pulse. There, crouched behind my dresser, was a figure, thin, folded in on itself, like a spider waiting to strike. I blinked, willing it to be a dream, but it was real. Too real. I slapped my face, muttered nonsense, anything to break the spell. The figure rose, silent and deliberate, and glided out of the room. No footsteps, no creak of the floorboards, just gone. My heart hammered as I sat there paralyzed, waiting for a sound that never came. Eventually, I grabbed my phone and called my dad, my voice trembling as I recounted what I'd seen. "Trish, it's just a night terror," he said, his voice thick with sleep. "You're stressed. Go back to bed." I stayed on the line, creeping into the living room, flipping on every light. The apartment was empty, the door still locked. I almost convinced myself it was a hallucination until morning. When I went to leave for the gym, I found the foyer door unlocked. My stomach dropped. Had I forgotten to lock it? Or had someone been inside? The final blow came when I opened the back door of my SUV to toss in my gym bag. The floor was streaked with damp, yellowish stains, and the blanket I always kept there was gone. It hit me like a freight train. The woman. She'd hidden in my car at the gas station, slipped into my apartment, watched me sleep. I called my dad again, hysterical, but he was calm. "Check for missing stuff. If nothing's gone, the cops won't do much." Nothing was missing, save for the blanket. But the violation lingered, a stain no amount of scrubbing could erase. I stayed holed up in that apartment for weeks, jumping at every sound until I couldn't take it anymore. I moved out by the end of the month, leaving behind the ghosts of that rainy night and the woman who'd slipped through my life like a shadow. Story 2, the party that left me stranded high school was a blur of bad decisions, but none worse than the night I let Michael talk me into crashing a house party I wasn't invited to. It was our freshman year, and Michael, with his easy grin and knack for trouble, had a way of making dumb ideas sound like adventures. "It's gonna be epic," he said, dangling the promise of free booze and cool kids. I was skeptical but bored, so I agreed, ignoring the nagging voice in my head that said this was a mistake. Michael picked me up in his rusty Honda, the kind that rattled like it was one pothole away from falling apart. "Leave your phone in the car," he said as we pulled up to the house, a sprawling suburban monstrosity with music thumping through the walls. "You don't want to lose it, and trust me, people here will snatch it." I frowned, my thumb hovering over the screen. "Seriously? Seriously, it's a party, not a monastery. Relax." His tone was light, but there was an edge to it, like he was daring me to argue. I sighed and tossed my phone into the glove compartment, already regretting it. The backyard was a chaotic sea of bodies, kids smoking, drinking, laughing too loud. The air was thick with the scent of cheap beer and weed, fairy lights strung haphazardly above casting a surreal glow. Michael disappeared almost immediately, leaving me to navigate the crowd alone. I grabbed a red cup from a table, the contents burning my throat as I sipped. Then another, and another. By midnight, my vision was swimming, the world tilting like a funhouse mirror. I stumbled toward the house, leaning against the wall to steady myself. My watch read 1 a.m., maybe later. It was hard to tell through the haze. I needed to find Michael and get out of there. I weaved through the crowd, asking strangers if they'd seen him. Blank stares and shrugs were all I got. Panic crept in, clawing at the edges of my drunken fog. I reached for my phone, then cursed myself. Michael's stupid rule had left me stranded. The house was too far from mine to walk sober, let alone in this state. But I didn't have a choice. The night air was crisp, the fall chill biting through my thin jacket as I stumbled onto the road. My head spun, each step a battle against dizziness and regret. Why had I listened to Michael? Why had I drunk so much? The questions looped in my mind, punctuated by the crunch of gravel under my sneakers. I made it to the main road, my breath visible in the cold. Hitchhiking seemed like my only option. I stuck out my thumb, shivering as cars sped by, their drivers oblivious or indifferent. Minutes dragged on, each one heavier than the last, until a gray pickup slowed and pulled over. Relief flooded me as I staggered toward it. The driver was an older man, his beard flecked with gray, his eyes hidden in the shadow of a baseball cap. "Need a lift?" he asked, his voice gravelly but warm. I nodded, slurring my address as I climbed in. The cab smelled of stale cigarettes and motor oil, but I was too grateful to care. We drove in silence at first, the hum of the engine lulling me into a false sense of security. He started asking questions: where I'd been, why I was out so late. My answers were mumbled, incoherent, my head lolling against the window. Then we passed my street, the familiar sign flashing by in the dark. "Hey, that was my turn," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. He didn't respond, just kept driving, his hands tight on the wheel. My stomach twisted, a primal instinct cutting through the alcohol. "You missed it," I said again, louder. "Let me out." He turned to me, his face illuminated by the dashboard lights, and the warmth was gone. His eyes glinted with something dark, predatory. "You shouldn't be hitchhiking drunk," he said, his voice low and mocking. "Makes you an easy target." His hand reached over, brushing my leg, and I froze. My heart pounding so loud I thought it would burst. Before I could react, a siren wailed behind us, red and blue lights flooding the cab. The man swore, his hand jerking back as he pulled over. I didn't wait. I fumbled with the door, stumbled out, and ran toward the police cruiser, my legs shaky but fueled by adrenaline. The officer listened to my frantic story, his face unreadable. "We were looking for a gray truck," he said. "Guy stole something from a store up the road." I didn't care about the theft. I just wanted to go home. The officer drove me back, lecturing me about drinking and hitchhiking, but I barely heard him. That night changed me. I swore off getting blackout drunk, swore off trusting people like Michael. The road had taught me a lesson I'd never forget. Sometimes the real danger isn't the darkness. It's the person offering you a ride out of it. Story 3. The frat party blackout college was a haze of cheap vodka and bad decisions. But my junior year at a party school in upstate New York was the peak of my reckless phase. I wasn't in a sorority, but I never missed a frat party, drawn to the chaos like a moth to a flame. My friends Deanna and Kayla were the same, always chasing the next high, the next story to laugh about over greasy diner food. When they heard about a Kappa Sigma bash 20 minutes off campus, I didn't hesitate. Hungover or not, I was in. We lived in a ramshackle house with 2 other girls, a rental that smelled faintly of mildew and echoed with our laughter. That night we pre-gamed hard, shots of tequila, chasers of Diet Coke, music blaring from a Bluetooth speaker. By the time we piled into an Uber, we were already sloppy, passing a flask back and forth like it was a sacred ritual. The driver shot us disapproving looks, but we didn't care. We were invincible. The Kappa Sigma house was a beast of a place, all peeling paint and sagging porches, but inside, it was alive. The living room pulsed with a DJ's bass, bodies pressed together in a sweaty, writhing mass. The kitchen hosted 2 beer pong tables, red cups scattered like confetti. I don't remember much after we arrived, just flashes like a broken film reel. Frat guys on the porch, their laughter sharp and mocking. The sting of beer on my tongue as I played pong with a guy whose face I can't recall. A dark corner where we talked, his hand brushing mine, his voice a low hum I couldn't quite catch. Then nothing, a void where hours should have been. I woke up on the side of a road, the grass damp beneath me, my head pounding like a jackhammer. It was still dark, the sky a starless expanse, and the air was heavy with the scent of pine and earth. Trees loomed around me, their branches clawing at the night. I was alone, miles from anywhere, with no idea how I'd gotten there. I patted my pockets, empty. My crossbody bag, my phone, my wallet, all gone. My white shirt was smeared with dirt, my jeans torn at the knee. Panic surged, hot and suffocating, as I staggered to my feet. The road stretched endlessly in both directions, lit only by a few distant street lamps. I was on a back road, far from the frat house, far from anything familiar. I started walking, my sneakers scuffing against the asphalt, my mind racing. Had I left with someone? Had I been drugged? The questions were knives, each one cutting deeper. After what felt like an eternity, I reached a street lamp and leaned against it, my breath ragged. I decided to flag down a car, risky, but I was out of options. It took 15 agonizing minutes before headlights appeared. I stepped into the road, waving frantically, my heart in my throat. The car slowed, a beat-up sedan, and the driver, a guy in his 30s with a goatee and a crooked nose, rolled down the window. "You okay?" he asked, his voice neutral. "I'm stranded," I said, my voice cracking. "No phone, no nothing. Can you get me home?" He nodded, gesturing to the passenger seat. I hesitated, then climbed in, rattling off my address. He punched it into his GPS, muttering, "Okay, here we go." The words sounded innocuous, but something about his tone made my skin crawl. We drove in silence, the road unspooling before us. He asked questions, where I'd been, how I'd ended up here, and I answered vaguely, my instincts screaming to stay guarded. His voice was soft, almost soothing, but it felt wrong, like a lullaby sung by a stranger. I noticed him glancing at me, his eyes lingering too long, his head turning in a way that made my stomach churn. 20 minutes passed, then 30, and we were still on the same desolate road, trees pressing in on both sides. "How much farther?" I asked, my voice tight. "Not far," he said, but he didn't look at me. I asked again, louder, and he just hummed, his hand drifting to my knee. "What color underwear you wearing?" he asked, his voice a sickening whisper. I jerked my leg away, my heart racing. "Don't hurt me," I pleaded, hating how small I sounded. "I just want to go home." "Why would I hurt you?" he said, but his smile was a blade. He pulled onto the shoulder, the car lurching to a stop, and leaned toward me, his breath hot and sour. I didn't think, I just acted, yanking the door open and bolting into the woods. My sneakers pounded the earth, branches snapping against my arms as I ran, fueled by pure terror. I hid behind a tree, my hands over my mouth to stifle my sobs, as his voice echoed through the darkness. "Where you at? I just want to have some fun." The words were vile, a promise of something unspeakable. I waited, trembling, until I heard his car roar to life and peel away. I crept back to the road, every rustle making me jump. Another car eventually appeared, and I waited until I was sure it wasn't him before flagging it down. This driver was older, kinder, and he drove me home without incident. It was 4 a.m. when I stumbled into our house, where Deanna and Kayla were waiting, their faces pale with worry. They had my phone and bag, recovered from the frat house, but no answers about how I'd ended up on that road. The boy I'd talked to swore he hadn't left with me, and no one else had a clue. The truth was a black hole, and it haunted me. I cut back on drinking after that, swore off frat parties, and never hitchhiked again. Some nights I still wake up tasting fear, wondering who or what left me on that road. Story 4. The Forest of Forgotten Passports. It was October 1990, and I was 29, a wanderer with paint-stained hands and a heart full of reckless dreams. I'd been hitchhiking across Europe, chasing art and adventure, my life a patchwork of fleeting connections and borrowed rides. That day I stood at a gas station somewhere in France, my thumb out, my backpack heavy with sketches and hope. I needed to get to Paris to retrieve my paintings from an exhibition, a small triumph in a life that often felt like a gamble. The sun was high, the air warm and golden, the kind of day that made you believe in second chances. A beat-up Peugeot pulled over, its driver a wiry Frenchman with a scruffy beard and eyes that didn't quite meet mine. He was my age, maybe a little older, his clothes rumpled, his smile crooked. "Paris?" he asked in broken English, and I nodded, climbing into the passenger seat. The car smelled of stale wine and something sharper, like regret. We made small talk as we merged onto the highway, his accent thick but charming. He asked about my travels, my art, and I answered with the guarded enthusiasm of someone who'd learned to keep strangers at arm's length. Then, without warning, he reached across me, his arm brushing my thigh, and popped open the glove compartment. My breath caught as he pulled out a stack of passports. 4 of them, their covers worn but distinct. He handed them to me, his expression unreadable. "My girlfriends," he said, his voice flat. I flipped through them, each one revealing a young woman's face, their smiles frozen in time. "This one," he said, pointing to the first, "fell off my motorcycle, dead. The second, a car crash. The third, a brain tumor. The fourth, a fall from a horse." "I'm an unlucky man," he said, his laugh hollow. I nodded, my mouth dry, and handed the passports back. The weight of them lingered in my hands, a silent warning. Why did he have them? Why show me? My mind raced, but I kept my face neutral, years of hitchhiking teaching me to hide fear. He announced he was taking a shortcut, and I didn't argue, hoping it would get me to Paris faster. But the shortcut was no charming detour through villages. It was a dirt road, barely wide enough for the car, that plunged into a dense forest. The trees closed in, their branches scraping the roof, the light dimming to a sickly twilight. My pulse quickened, my hand inching toward the door handle. The man grew quiet, his earlier chatter replaced by a tense silence. Then abruptly he shouted, "I don't want to speak English anymore." His voice was sharp, final, and I froze, the air in the car thickening with unspoken threats. The forest seemed to watch, its shadows hiding secrets I didn't want to uncover. As the car slowed, my body screamed to act. I was no damsel. I'd faced down drunks and creeps on the road, my strength honed by years of survival. I met his gaze, my eyes hard, daring him to try something. Maybe he saw the fight in me, the rage simmering beneath my calm. Maybe he sensed I wouldn't beg or break. Whatever it was, he hesitated, and the car began to speed up, the forest thinning as we emerged into the fading light. He offered to let me stay at his house, his voice soft again, but I saw the trap in his words. "No," I said, my first word since his outburst, and it carried the weight of my resolve. He dropped me on the highway, the sky now a bruise of red and orange, and drove off without a backward glance. I didn't go to the police. I didn't speak French, and part of me doubted my own fear, chalking it up to an overactive imagination. I slept on the roadside that night, exhausted and shaken, the passports haunting my dreams. Years later, in a Leipzig cafe, I told the story to a student. He pulled out his phone, his fingers flying over the screen, and showed me a photo. Patrice Allegra, a serial killer who'd terrorized France in the 90s, leaving bodies along highways. It was him. The realization was a punch to the gut. I'd ridden with a monster, my silence my shield, my defiance my salvation. I've since tried to contact authorities, but Allegra's in prison, and my story is just another footnote. The guilt lingers, though. Could I have stopped him? The forest keeps its secrets, but I carry the weight of those passports, a reminder of the darkness I escaped and the souls who didn't.